Welcome, all pregnant families, midwives or birth workers. This is Tracy Anderson Askew, your host for the Transform Your Birth podcast, changing your mind about birth one story at a time. Each week we will be exploring a birth story through the lens of what birth can teach us. I'll be digging deep into each story so you can learn what it is that can change the way a birth unfolds. We can't control birth, but we can influence it. So listen in to find out how. Enjoy. Suzzie is a doula and mother of two. She shares her experiences that led to her becoming a birth worker. We explore the role of the doula, how they can offer continuity and emotional support when the medical system often can't. We also look at the role of the mind in birth and how it can change the way you experience your birth and even the pain. Suzzie is a very experienced doula and has great wisdom to share. Sit back and enjoy this episode.
Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. Most of the stories you will hear through this podcast are graduates of the Transform Your Birth workshop held in Canberra. Our Transform Your Birth Today course is now available to anyone, anywhere, at any time, and includes all the wonderful wisdom of this course and live weekly catch-ups when you need it with our host, Tracy. For a little taste, please accept our pregnancy gift offer, which contains free the first few lessons and some essential wisdom for pregnancy. The link can be found in these show notes or visit transformyourbirth.com.au. And now for the episode.
Welcome everybody, another episode of the Transform Your Birth podcast. And I've got another little change in our format today because I've decided to bring on the lovely Suzzie Vez, who is a doula from Seattle in America. So she's across the oceans. And I'm a doula lover. I once was a doula myself, and I think learning and understanding what doulas do is a really powerful form of support that can really make a big difference to the way labour unfolds. So welcome, Suzzie. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. It's very exciting to get to chat with others that are just trying to help mothers on their way in this big job.
Yeah, big job, all right. Birth is the doorway into parenting, and so it's this moment of transition where you go from the woman to being the mother. And so having a bit of help, some wise woman help, can really make a difference. So Suzzie, why don't you tell us a little bit about what got you into becoming a birth worker?
Yeah, I actually did not start out in birth work at all. In fact, when I grew up, birth was like terrifying to me. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to be a mother, mainly because the process of bringing life to the earth seemed like a big deal, and I had heard a lot of horror stories about it. I worked in finance, studied economics, and when I had my first, I actually came through loss first, and had a lot of medical complications from that. And so when I went into birth for the first time with my daughter Zoe, I was very overwhelmed, very scared. And I had a lot of expectations from my family around, the right way to give birth and, but also not support around that. And it was very difficult for me. I ended up having an emergency C-section with Zoe. To this day, I'm not really sure if it's one of those that could have been prevented with better care, but I know that better care would have made a better experience, no matter what the outcome was. After I had Zoe, I really chanced into having my beliefs about birth changed. I had joined a new moms group. We'd go hiking every week. And one of the moms I met there was a midwifery student. And as she would kind of share the stories of her families, she gave me a place where it was safe to understand what I went through because I had never had anybody to talk to about it before. And I kind of realized that the way that I went through the experience was, if you're on a hike and you're like in this like crazy beautiful place the whole time, but the whole time you like look down and you're watching yourself take one step in front of the other and you're thinking, what if I fall down the side of the mountain? That's how I went. That's how motherhood was for me, was I was just so scared that something could happen. And so after I met this lovely friend, I realized that there were a lot of safety rails that I could hold on to, a lot of things that can make the birth process really safe,
Mm.
and a lot of things that I could do internally to calm myself and reassure myself and take care of myself, nurture myself, mother myself in those moments where I felt scared, because those are very human and real emotions, and there's nothing wrong with having them.
Mm.
I had my second daughter, Hazel, was a VBAC. She was a 10-pound baby. She was gigantic, but it was such an empowering experience. And I just, from that birth, was so different because I left it feeling very strong and empowered and in tune with my own intuition and wisdom. And I had so much support, and I have had knowledge about how to build that support around me, which was a gift that my friend had kind of taught me in our friendship. So I got very fortunate. After I had Hazel, after about a year, I had been a stay-at-home mom for a couple years, and I was ready to go back to work. And I knew that I wasn't ready to go back into finance. I really wanted to do something that felt more meaningful to me, because I knew that I was not the only one that was on a similar journey of,
Right about that.
yeah.
Mm. I love how you've talked about that journey in and I did a podcast yesterday as well, and it was exactly the same, of how one birth invites you to learn things, which then has a huge impact on the next birth and potentially after that. So one of the things we explore in this podcast is what moves the needle in birth. As you look at your two stories, and you made very different choices for baby number 2, what do you think made the biggest difference to having quite a good outcome? Because you ended up having a baby at home, didn't you?
I did. Yes, she
Yeah.
was a home birth, and it was lovely. My midwife was amazing. My doula was amazing. Although I am divorced, that is one of the few times my partner really showed up for me.
Mm.
Yeah, it was lovely. I think that one of the biggest things that changed for me was what I saw my role as a human being in the birth process.
Yeah.
I think that the first time for Hazel's birth and through my loss, it all felt like something happening to me,
Right.
right? And I didn't have much of a voice. Even when I asked, like I remember asking my OB, like, should I take a birth course? Like my in-laws want me to do a natural birth because that's what they do in their family. And they were like, no, that doesn't make a difference. Don't worry about it. And
Mm.
and when I asked about nutrition, they're like, haha, like so silly, like they literally told me, like, don't worry your pretty little mind about it. Just go get a Coke Slurpee on the way home. And like now I know that those things are very, very important, and they helped me a lot. But I think fundamentally, when I work with moms, I try to help them see that they're on almost like a hero's journey.
Mm.
Like if you think about the arc of a story of any characters that we love, we know that they're starting at one point, and when they circle through, yes, they're going to meet obstacles. Yes, they're going to have to overcome things. Yes, there might be moments of challenge,
Yeah.
but they're also going to receive like amazing gifts of knowledge, and they're going to grow, and they're going to build friendships, and they're going to learn about themselves. And then when they reintegrate back out home, they're these much different, wiser, stronger, incredible people. And that's why we fall in love with characters and stories. And I think when I went through birth the second time, I was able to fall in love with myself, because I was able to have those people that supported me, and I was able to go through those challenges without judgment. And I was able to recognize, like, yes, this is a moment of growth for me, and I actually get to be the main character in my story. It's not happening to me. It's something that I'm growing and evolving through.
Mm.
And I think that made like all the challenges not so negative.
Yeah. Well, even more, not so negative, but also meaningful. The challenges are part of what it is to be a mother, because
Yeah,
it doesn't stop when you give birth. In fact, it just begins, and that's where the rubber
I
hits the
know.
road.
Yeah,
So I always say this: the struggle is the gold. It's in the struggle that we discover what we've got inside of us. It's in the struggle and pain or intensity or whatever, which is helping you to discover that you're so much more than what you ever imagined. And I usually, the quote, we often don't discover that sitting on the couch watching Netflix, we discover it when we're pushed to our limits. So there's great value in the process of giving birth. So you had a very different transition into motherhood. Tell me more about how you were able to adapt to motherhood with the first birth and then compared to the second. What differences did you notice unfold?
Oh, honestly, like I struggled a lot transitioning into motherhood with Zoe. I was wow. Sorry, I'm just feeling a little emotional just thinking back to the girl I was. You know, I was a corporate girl. Like I worked very hard and very long. And then after I had Zoe, they kind of told me like come back full time, which really was like more than full time or don't come back at all. And then so I decided not to come back. And my then husband had just graduated with his master's. And so we ended up moving when she was 6 weeks old. And I will say that for a good solid year, apart from the times when I would go to that mom's group and be surrounded by other women who are also in the place that I was very lonely. I was very, I don't know if the bored is the right way to say it, but it was very monotonous. And I don't know if Zoe picked up on my stress or if I was feeding off of her stress, but she was very colicky and a very challenging baby. And I don't know what led what there, but it was a struggle for sure. With Zoe, I think that by the time I had Hazel, I had learned to ask for help, receive help,
Yeah.
recognize myself as a person who deserved to be cared for as much as caring for myself as much as my own children. And so, and Hazel was just a much easier baby. Like where Zoe might cry for hours before she slept, no matter what I did, whether I tried to feed her or tried to walk around with her, or I literally like almost for a year, like she was almost never put down because she couldn't sleep on her back. She would spit up and choke on it. It was very scary, that level of colic. And then Hazel like was a very different child in that I could swaddle her up and put her in her bed. And if I caught her when she was like that first yawn, or when even before that, when like I would first notice like, oh, she would like her eyes would kind of like glaze over and I'd be like, oh my God, she's tired. I'd swaddle her and put her down and she'd put herself to sleep. I was like, oh, this is what they mean, like awake but sleepy. And it was just, she was a different child. And so I think that also helped.
Do you think the birth impacted the two children? It's an
I
interesting
do.
question. Yeah.
Yeah. People ask a lot about does birth trauma affect children? And I think it certainly did for my kids.
Mm.
Um, I would hate for someone to think like, oh my goodness, I had a C-section or I had a traumatic birth, I hurt my kid, and then feel like shame about that. I know I certainly went through days or years where I felt a lot of shame about the way that her birth unfolded. But I think instead of shame at some level, I learned that it was okay for me to heal and okay for me to recognize that what we went through in her birth was hard and that it was just that hard. And that was not a reflection of me or her or us
Yeah.
being good or bad or my body
100%.
failing or anything like that.
Well said. For those listening, and particularly if you have had a difficult birth in the past and it's been something that has caused you to take a long time to integrate and to make sense of and to create a story around or meaning around, that to always remind yourself that both babies and us have an innate capacity to heal. When you go through a difficult experience like a highly medicated or complex birth, and at the end, when women finally, land that baby on the other side, can take a while to make sense of what happened. Over time, particularly if they're given good information, more information and understanding about why things might have unfolded the way they did, identifying what they'd do differently next time, and to help them bring that birth into its full circle and ability to land somewhere in the mind more peacefully, that story can then take on a whole new meaning. It can take on a whole new way of looking at what unfolded, and then go looking for the gold in that. We then have the capacity to heal and become bigger. In fact, I've seen that happen so many times with women, and you're one of them, Suzzie, where that birth is what led you on a path to looking for answers for baby number 2 that were very different to how you approach baby number 1. No birth is ever in vain. And coming back to the babies have an innate capacity to heal. And sometimes when babies have been through a rough birth process, they cry a lot, but it's in the crying that is helping them to release the inbuilt tension. It's the nervous system's intelligence as a way of trying to bring that nervous system back to homeostasis. And when they feel safe and responded to, then they're not dealing so much with survival as they are with the healing process. And that healing happens quite spontaneously through babies. So sometimes when babies cry, it's just important for us, if we know that they're not hungry and they're not uncomfortable and they don't have a pain in their belly or something like that, sometimes babies are crying with the need to release what their whole system has had to go through in order to get into the world. So I love listening to stories, and yours is a beautiful one to show the growth and the healing process that often happens as we get wiser and smarter and more aware of what we need. So this little experience, Suzzie, led you then to becoming a doula. So tell us about that journey.
Yeah, I decided to be a doula. Doula certification is challenging, but not unmanageable. It's a lot quicker than, say, becoming an RN. I knew I wanted to support moms through birth, and I knew it was a good starting place for me. I didn't know that I would love it so much I would stay here. I have supported about 200 families at this point.
Wow.
And I don't know. I mean, birth challenges us in so many ways, and it's such a special thing to be able to hold people before, during, and after, because both physically, emotionally, it's very demanding in so many ways. And I know it was for me, and I can tell you that if it's challenging for you as well, that you're not alone.
Yeah.
But there are people that care and that understand, and sometimes those people are in our families, and sometimes they're outside, and we need to go find them, because we all deserve to have somebody that believes in us.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your doula practice, you do antenatal care during the birth and postnatally as well?
Yeah, so I meet with people a couple times before their birth. The first time we're really talking about like what's important to you in your birth, right? Like
What a great
I try
question.
to I know. Well, I try to
Yeah.
really understand people because some of us are very medically minded. I've had people like last night, I was at this beautiful home birth with a mom who knew she didn't want any interventions. And oh my God, it was so lovely. But I've also worked with moms that have said, like, hey, I had preeclampsia with my last birth and it was really scary and it was really dangerous. And I let it go way too far. Like, I know I need an induction. I
Yeah.
just don't know how to handle the fact that I have to do an induction. Or moms that say, like, you know what? The only thing I want is my baby before Christmas. So, like, how do I get this induction? And I think all these approaches are valid.
Yes.
Um, but we need to know as we're going through the process, like what challenges are we going to face? And when we reach a stressful situation, how do we teach our bodies to recognize it? How do we release the stress? How do we kind of find or dance with that,
Mm.
uh, the life force of that is birth, the birth process? Like we know that a storm is powerful and the process of birth is powerful, and it's something to be respected no matter which values or approaches we have as we come into it.
So very true. And the role of a doula is to respect women's choices. It's, there is no one way to do this. And that's why I love the Transform Your Birth podcast, because every story is just so different and it takes you on a ride, and every woman's choices around that can be different too. So a doula's role is very much to respect the choices of the mother, to give her some level of continuity across those spaces, which is often lacking in a lot of the models of care, unless you've got your own midwife, either an independent midwife or you're in the birth centre model, which is what we have over here, where you have your own midwife who follows you all the way through. Apart from that, both in the private and the public system, it can be very fractured, and you get different people for this and different people for the birth and different people for postnatal, and that can feel very discombobulating, whereas a doula can fill in that or create that continuity all the way through. So you've got a trusted voice who you can talk to about what your challenges are. But of course, a doula is not someone either to give medical advice. They're not qualified to do that. But they can help you to ask the questions and to understand the nature of the landscape that you're traveling, and what sort of questions you can ask in order to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, when we think about the medical system, I often hear people say that they expected that they would feel very cared for in the systems, but they were surprised. Like, everyone is busy, everyone has a job, the nurses have to chart. Even when I'm at a home birth, the midwife is taking the blood pressure. She's checking she's checking to make sure that you're physically okay and monitoring you, and she's charting just like they would in the hospital. And sometimes you do need that person there so when you're feeling the power of contractions and you're like, is this normal? Am I okay?
Yeah.
Whereas I've never done this before. How would I even know if this was not okay? That you have somebody that can help you understand, that can maybe give you some support in verbalizing what you're feeling. Take care of your very basic needs, as far as making sure that you're fed, that you're getting your water, that you know how to move, that sometimes we don't know, we don't know how to advocate for ourselves. So whether it's wanting more space or time for labor, being able to ask for that and advocate for that, or if you're like, I'm sensing something's wrong, but nobody's paying attention to me, helping you find your voice and bring attention to that fact. Yeah, we do a lot of different things, but you're right. We're not the medical provider, and we don't do, we're never going to be the one to like give you a medication or to take your blood pressure. But we do help you communicate well with your team.
I always say, Suzzie, it's all the juice of the job without the medical duty of care.
Oh my God, it's the fun part.
Yeah, it's the fun part. It's without all that crappy bookwork that we have midwives here, and we have direct entry midwives. So they're trained in midwifery, which is the art of being with woman. But when they have their own clients, when they're caseloading, what's called caseloading, and they're following, they're the continual person for that particular family, they can spend more time with the woman, but even then they've still got a lot of responsibilities they have to do in that space. And so I know when I used to be a doula, the midwives would say to me, "Oh, you do what I thought I'd be doing as a midwife, but I'm still stuck doing all this paperwork and accountability and stuff that they have to deal with," which is really difficult. Now,
It is.
Yeah, sorry, keep going.
Oh, they have, medical providers have a lot on their plate, and they're often in harsh systems themselves. So it's not, I remember once watching the documentary, The Business of Being Born. And I think at some point, like after I had my surgical birth, I had a lot of criticism towards my doctors for not listening to me, not helping me, not answering my questions. And now that I've been in the hospital so much more, and I've been to obstetrical association meetings, I realize how overburdened so many of our care providers are and how big their hearts are, but just they can't do everything.
Yeah, exactly. And the pressure's on them to not make mistakes. This is
Mhm.
the other challenge that they've got, and particularly doctors. You know, at the end of the day, if the shit hits the fan, it's going to be on the doctors to, you know, to protect the mother and the baby. And if we get a bad outcome, what do? We tend to sue our doctors, and that's really unfortunate because then we end up, you know, like it changes the way they practice medicine as a result of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure on them to get it right, so they're always having to be seen to be managing. Now, Suzzie, one of the things that you and I have in common, particularly in the way that we prepare women, is we harness the power of the mind. The mind is often the missing link when it comes to preparing for childbirth. We might give people good information, or they might get overburdened by Googling and finding all sorts of different bits and pieces, which can be tricky for the mind because then the mind doesn't know what to do with too much information, and it tends to create confusion and overwhelm. One of the things I've worked hard to is to really help to people to understand how they can harness the power of the mind. What have you found in preparing women for birth and then watching them in birth when they start to tap into the power of the mind and to direct it in a really powerful way in birth? What have you discovered?
Uh, well, I really believe that birth is very much an emotional process as much as it is a physical process. And we do know that things like fear can stop labor in its tracks. And I know that that was something that I experienced in Zoe's birth. Um, I think the real power of the mind is learning how to detach or decouple almost our emotional experience from our physical experience, and then finding that we can have choice in how we define that emotional experience,
Yeah.
right? You know, I first discovered this in that year after I had Zoe, when I was very depressed, I was very stressed, I was very sleep deprived. And somebody had sent me a book on meditation, and I thought, oh, this is probably not going to work for me. But I had, like, I knew I had to do something and I didn't know what to do. So I was like, okay, I'll start practicing. And I remember there would be times when I would turn on a meditation or a breathing practice, and I would actually like talk it through with her, like if I was trying to like get her to sleep. And I'd have to tell myself, like, I just have to be a good enough parent. I just have to be safe enough. I just have to like, I'm trying to regulate myself so that you can regulate and learn from me. Like copy, like I'm gonna calm my body down so you can calm your body down. And I did learn that when I like, as I learned the different breathing practices, like box breathing, triangle breathing, um, I did some hypnotherapy, and I learned that like I actually had a lot of control over my physical state,
Yeah.
way more than I thought, you know, like, and it's funny because it is a practice and it doesn't come like, it's not like sometimes I would think, or sometimes it wouldn't work as well for me. And I'd be like, but I tried it today and it didn't work. But over time, as I kind of committed to a practice, I learned that I became a
Yeah.
very calm and very present mother, and it supported me very well. And then when I was in labor with Hazel, I did a little bit of hypnotherapy and a lot of meditation. And my my relationship to my contractions was very different,
Mm.
because instead of feeling like these contractions were something that I had to fight with, that were taking over my body, that were just overwhelming and painful, it was like I could see in my mind, like, oh, I see my body working. And I could have this like really deep appreciation that this was my body working this hard to bring me my baby that I had wanted for so long, and that I had been too scared to have for so long. Um, and so when I think about Hazel's birth, I really like, I I never look back at those experiences or look at the picture and think for a moment about pain. Were there moments of intensity? Yes. Were there moments of like hard work? Yes. Were there moments where I felt like my body was on this train ride and I was kind of like what's happening? Like, this is really powerful. Yes, but it was not painful and it was so much fun. I have this picture of my daughter Zoe was 4 when I had Hazel. And there's a picture she had come, she was with my mom, but my mom had brought her back to see me because I was feeling just a little down and I was in the birth tub. And Zoe like climbed in with me and it was, it's like this really big birth tub. And
Yeah.
I just remember her like blowing bubbles in the water while I was trying to breathe through contractions. And, like I have these moments of like laughter. And then I remember like one of the things somebody had told me was like, oh, buy some like chocolates that you love and bring your mind to like the taste of the chocolate through a contraction because it will take a minute for the chocolate to melt. And that's how long your contractions are going to be. And like the memory I have is I can remember the taste of the chocolate, but I can't remember the feeling of the contraction,
Yeah.
right? Like our minds are
Right.
really powerful.
Yeah.
And I think that all the training I had done with my mind and all the time that I had spent reteaching myself that I was safe and learning that the birth process was safe allowed me to feel safe, even in the presence of that like really big work that I was doing.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I get fascinated by listening to women tell their stories about what they were doing with their mind. There can be some really funny ones. In my course, I get people to go to their favorite place in nature. And this one particular woman, she did the practice, and she said, when I went to my favorite place, I went underwater, and I was just watching the fish floating by, and I had a starfish on the ground and on the sandy ocean floor and some shells. And she said, and in the corner was an octopus in a cave. And she said, well, guess what happened when I went into labor? And I said, what happened? And she said, well, I went into my underwater scene, and every time I had a contraction, I watched the octopus come out, attach its tentacles to my uterus, and sucked my baby out of me. And I thought that was absolute gold. What women do with their minds in labor
I
is
know.
really fun to get,
Yeah.
particularly when they realize that that's one of their biggest superpowers, to take your mind other than what you're currently experiencing. What you focus on, you fuel. So if you take your mind to a word or image that is more constructive rather than destructive, because women do this all the time, but they'll often go, oh no, here comes the pain, the pain, the pain. What are you going to get more of? The pain.
The pain. Yeah.
Exactly. So you can do it to benefit you, or you can do it to make it harder. And so
Well, and I
finding
feel like
words and images helps.
yeah.
So,
And for most of us, we've been trained to focus on the pain in birth. We've
yeah,
been taught, like, I know, at least for me, like, that was the only, when I thought about birth before I had Zoe, the only thing I thought was the pain. I didn't think
yeah,
about the joy of meeting her or
yeah,
how amazing it would feel when somebody brings you a cool rag when you're hot and you're, like
yeah,
all the little things that just feel really good in the process of doing something hard
yeah.
are great, like, but if you don't know to appreciate them or you don't actively bring that energy, they
Mm,
don't exist anymore. They disappear.
yeah, yeah. Very, very powerful. So, what sort of what wisdom would you share with a person having their first baby? What would you share?
Oh, I would share that one, it's okay for it to be hard and it's not a reflection of you.
Mm,
Um, I hear so many moms say, like, why didn't you tell me it would be so hard? And I want to say, I just want to wrap my love around them and say, you're not alone. Like,
mm,
let people help you learn to build your whatever, like those alliances that are going to make you love this parenting journey because they exist and they're out there. But also like the process of becoming like self-aware and self-centered and grounded, just like you've said, so much of that is mental.
mm,
Um, And so don't be afraid to dive into your own mind. I know sometimes it can feel scary. And sometimes what we find there is that we have a lot of automatic negative
yeah.
thoughts. And it's okay. It's okay to give space for those to to acknowledge that they're there. And then after that comes the beautiful process of releasing them and then having those automatic positive thoughts that I think are the key to happiness and motherhood and it not feeling so hard, whether it's pregnancy or labor or that first year after.
It's beautiful. Thank you, Suzzie. Thank you so much for giving your time to talk to my audience.
Yeah.
Can you tell us
thank you
how people
for
can find you if they want to follow up on some of your offerings?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. It's at She Births Bravely. And I also have a really fun quiz. What does your birth plan say about your personality? If you just go to shebirthsbravely.com/quiz. I think it's really good for us to help identify, what makes us special and what do we need to communicate to our teams. And it's a really great conversation starting point.
Lovely. That's beautiful. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in and listening to lovely Suzzie, a doula, a mother of two, and who possesses great wisdom and supports women through this incredibly important time in their lives. Suzzie's helped us to understand how one birth can lead on to the next and how what you learn with one can influence another. The role of the choices and how the choices that we make are going to directly influence the birth. She's also helped us to understand the power of the mind and how it can change the way we experience sensations. It can change the way we experience birth. And she's been an absolute delight to talk to. So thank you again, Suzzie, for coming on and talking to my team, my audience.
Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. And tune in again next week because we'll have some more good stuff, magical stuff for you. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and share this podcast. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. It is a place where you can learn, get support and grow into your role as a parent. Why not take advantage of a special gift for all pregnant women at transformyourbirth.com.au? Or if you have children, we have a gift for parents also.